to be here this morning in North America and this afternoon in Saudi Arabia with you. What I am hoping to do today is to provide you with some new and fresh information that's going to help you see a different way of looking at conflict, how to engage and empower it, and to actually make it significantly more profitable in your organizations. What I'd like to start with, though, is asking you 3 questions. The first question would be, is conflict something that you would like to be able to better harness, would be the first question. The second one would be, is conflict something you would like to be better equipped yourself to respond to? And the third question is conflict something that you would like to be able to use as a means to add value to yourself, to your people, and to your organization? And if you've answered yes to 1, 2, or all 3 of those questions, then I can assure you that what we're going to walk through this morning, this afternoon, is going to be able to respond to those questions. It's going to give you some fresh perspective and some tools to be able to move forward with that. So the first thing I'd like to do is I'd like to just get down the dialogue box, just to get you involved. Can you just type in the box, when was the last time that you experienced a conflict that became uncomfortable or difficult, or it didn't turn out the way you hoped it? Whether it was last week, today, yesterday, could you just go ahead and just mark in just what that looks like? I'd just like to kind of get a feel from you on that.
Okay, we've got first one a few weeks ago, a couple of days ago, a week ago, yesterday. I've had a clash with my supervisor.
Yeah. So what I'm kind of hearing is that, you know, it's all fairly recent, and probably if we unpack that a little further, you know, it's something that we all will have had, and it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is way in the past. It can be something very recent. And one thing that's interesting about conflict, I sort of describe it this way. I say conflict is a system that's perfectly designed to achieve the results you get. So if you think of an assembly line, and you have cars coming off the assembly line, and every 4th car coming off the assembly line is missing its right front fender, well, that system is perfectly designed to achieve the results it's getting. And no amount of hoping and wringing of hands is going to change that system until you change the system. And conflict in and of itself is really not the problem. It's actually you and me. It's people that are the catalyst for the conflict becoming toxic and difficult. It really comes down to being intentional about how we choose to engage it and empower it, which is what we're going to talk today about. So when I look at what you're saying, I think the most important thing to realize is that conflict is something we're all going to experience. It's not going to go away. It is inevitable and it is unavoidable, but it doesn't have to be fatal and costly. And that's what we're going to explore today. What I'd like to, first of all, is just look at how to engage conflict, the first part of what we're talking about. And engaging conflict, the first thing to look at is there's 2 types of conflict. And by looking at the pictures, you'll immediately recognize the one as unhealthy conflict, and the second picture as a group of people as healthy conflict, maybe not quite as the way you would see that. But let's just look at that unhealthy conflict first. Now, the picture itself speaks 1,000 words, doesn't it? When you think of that athlete there who has just lost it, you know, his emotions, his behavior are going to be over the top. Depending on what sport he's playing, he maybe looks like with soccer, he's probably going to get red carded. But we know that behavior creates a perfect storm that creates a level of conflict that is going to activate unhealthy conflict. Now, a quick question for you. As you look at that picture, have you ever seen yourself like that? Have you ever had a moment where you've been like that, where you've lost it, where, you know, you've gone over that tipping point, where that unhealthy conflict is starting to occur and grow? And just what kind of, I'd like you to just type in, if you've had that experience, which most of us have, if you've had that kind of experience, what kind of consequences happened from it? What kind of came out of it? Just kind of, if you just type in just the things that you saw happening as a result of you losing it, so to speak, of activating that unhealthy conflict. If you go ahead and type that in, that would be great. as you're typing, I'm going to just look at, here's some of the things that we normally see what happens with unhealthy conflict. We see that it destroys relationships, it decreases wellness, it blocks fairness, it undermines self-determination, it reinforces fear. We're going to talk more about that this morning. That's a big part of where we're going today. It shuts down creativity and innovation, which we know are the building blocks for productivity and profitability, and it reduces profitability. So we know that conflict, unhealthy conflict, has significant negative effects on the organization. So what would it look like to resolve unhealthy conflict? Let's have a look at that. And just, is there any feedback there just on any consequences that came up there?
Well, rather it's a mom, but we have one comment from Muhammad. It says, usually in this case, communication is lost when people say things that they regret later.
Oh, that's really good. Yeah, it's that regret after, isn't it, too? And that's one of those things where that fairness, where emotionally we're left afterwards feeling, we didn't handle ourselves well and handle others well, and huge. And what's interesting with that is it creates this underlying stress. We're going to talk a little bit more about that. Thank you for that comment. So let's just think about what would it look like to resolve unhealthy conflict. And as we dig into this, I want you to be absolutely clear that you can't bury conflict. You can't ignore it. You can't leave it alone. That you've got to resolve it. That it has to be dealt with. This theory that we sometimes like to apply to it, called the time heals all wounds theory. In North America, we'd say let sleeping dogs lie theory. And we just wait for everything to settle down. It'll get over itself. It won't. In fact, what happens is that conflict becomes what we call latent conflict, or it becomes hidden conflict in an organization. And it's kind of what you're just talking about with that individual was just talking about, is that you just get this internal conflict with yourself of how you were handled, whether it was fair or not. And as that unseen conflict, what happens is that is the stuff that really starts to divide an organization. What we normally deal with in conflict is what we call manifest conflict or seen conflict. And manifest conflict is the type of conflict that statistics tell us that 42% of our managers deal with. 2% of their time is dealing with manifest conflict, seen conflict. But latent conflict is the true cancer of an organization, because it embeds itself in the people and in the organization. It either blows up at some point in time really loudly or very quietly. Loudly, it looks like a group of people and a whole bunch of profit and department just all of a sudden disintegrating and leaving the organization. Quietly, it's that one person that's been with you for a long time, extremely loyal, and suddenly they just leave and there's no explanation. Quite often that's latent conflict. That's the hidden stuff, that they just never were able to express themselves in a way that they could describe how they were feeling, and that internalized conflict just suddenly overwhelmed them. So all of this happens, all of this conflict that we're talking about, healthy and unhealthy, happens inside of conflict management systems. And each of us has a conflict management system personally, and every organization has a conflict management system. How well we understand and know those conflict management systems usually dictate how well it's either working for us or not so much. A healthy conflict management system and healthy conflict will empower what we call a comprehensive or healthy bottom line. A bottom line that is the sum of an organization and its people's best parts. And we describe that as protecting relationships, advancing wellness and fairness, empowering pride of ownership, and yes, being highly profitable, making a lot of money. That's what we're in business for. If you're for a for-profit business, if you're not, obviously building wealth to do the things that you're called to do is about being profitable as well for those purposes. So when we think about healthy conflict, what would be the possible benefits that we would see in a healthy conflict situation? Healthy conflict is real. A lot of people say, well, that's just a nice thought. It's real. I'm going to show you how real it is. Healthy conflict, actually protects relationships. It increases that wellness, that physical wellness. It eliminates stress from organizations. It psychologically empowers people. It advances that emotional fairness. That even though It's not about regulatory or legislative fairness. We're talking about emotional fairness. That at the end of the day, I felt, even though I disagreed, I felt I was treated fairly. Reinforces self-determination, which is critical to build confidence and empowerment, which builds trust, and we're going to talk about that in a few minutes. Repositions fear. As opposed to being something we should be afraid of, it moves it to something that we can harness and we can actually use to our advantage to advance healthy conflict. Maximizes creativity and innovation. Well, that's all about giving people the ability to feel that confident enough that they can actually express themselves in ways that their creativity and innovation can add to the productivity of the organization and in turn the profitability. And the overall cost of conflicts we do. Some of our clients we do work, we tend to assess what the cost of conflict is at the beginning, and we a year later or a certain particular time we'll reassess what the cost of conflict is, and we'll actually be able to demonstrate a significant shift in the cost of conflict. It's a real thing and it's a real savings, and it can really be done. But let's just talk another step. I want to take you one more step to this healthy conflict, because this is really where the gold is in this next step. Those things you've probably heard or would agree and can see that. But here's what happens when you empower healthy conflict. We move from the safe ideas to the great ideas, meaning people are going to not just say what they think they should say, they're actually going to say what they could say. They're going to move from just the little idea to that idea that might change the entire organization. To move from the best practices to the next practices means that we're not just moving to the things we're already doing well and then looking what who else is doing things well, that we've got people in our organization that have new ways of thinking of how to do things well that could revolutionize how we do our business. And the third one, which is so essential, of moving from those cautious conversations to the courageous conversations. To actually express yourself in a moment where you can passionately disagree with someone without giving it or taking it personally. That is where the gold is when we start to engage and empower conflict from a healthy perspective. So one of the major obstacles that we deal with in trying to get to this place, to move to this place, is the fear of conflict. It's huge, it's significant, and I'm going to show you why. That whole idea of engaging the fear of conflict is the idea that we need to separate fear from conflict, and then we need to then unpack fear and how it affects us and our conflict management system. And the reason I say this is a big deal is all the statistics tell us that 8 out of 10 leaders have a fear of conflict. And even more challenging is that 9 out of 10 employees have experienced a conflict that has escalated negatively. So we know that if there's a fear at the top, then of course we're going to see these kind of results in the middle and through the organization. And you can just imagine, when you start thinking about that manifest and latent conflict, how easily that can get entrenched in an organization and start to strip away its greatest asset, its people, their creativity, their innovation, their confidence, and their empowerment. So the cool thing about this is those statistics don't have to exist. They really don't. We don't need to have those. The clients we work with, we often will move in an organization and they'll have those kind of levels of conflict. And we have seen those numbers change significantly. Will it get to zero? I've never seen it. I don't think you will. As long as we're dealing with people and emotions and the complexity of people, I think we're always going to have it. It's just a question of whether we're being intentional. I meant to mention that word intentional is a big word for me. It's about doing something now and not waiting for later with a plan to do something, but being intentional to do something different now to get a different result. But I think if we're intentional with this process, then we can actually make a significant change to those numbers. So when we think, though, of this fear of conflict, this is the piece that I want to unpack. Some of you may have some understanding of the science of fear, but I'm just going to unpack this as it relates to conflict and see what this looks like for you guys. So the first thing is to think about the idea, if you've played sports before, if you've played football, American football or soccer, if you've played golf, if you've played any basketball or anything involving a ball generally, you at some point are going to have to make a decision whether you're going to go long or you're going to go short. And depending on that decision and how well it's executed will depend on how well your decision worked out for you. Well, the same is actually very true with fear. We actually have a choice with fear that we can go long or we can go short. Now let me explain that. What you're looking at, of course, is a profile picture of the brain, of the head and the brain. I just want to draw your attention that when we look at it on the side, there's actually there's two systems they're identical. So there's what you're seeing now, and on the other side is another system. So there's two of everything I'm going to talk about. So let me draw your attention, first of all, to that turquoise shape highlighted in the center of the brain. It's called the thalamus. The thalamus is our radar system. It picks up all the external activities that are around us. Now I want you to take a look at that red almond-shaped object, and that's called the amygdala. And the amygdala is essentially our alarm system, and it sends out an alarm response based on the information it has. That's important. Now let me point you to that kind of lime green oblong shape that's called the hippocampus. And the hippocampus is our database. It stores all the past information, good and bad. It is also what the amygdala accesses to decide on the alarm signal required. Now finally, looking at that picture, you'll note that there's a long route and a short route displayed. The short route goes directly from the thalamus, or directly from the thalamus to the amygdala. So from the turquoise to the red. The long route goes from the thalamus through the prefrontal cortex, which I'll talk about, and then to the amygdala. And here's what we do. We engage the fear of conflict in our choice of that long or that short route. Let me just break that down into a very simple piece. I need to keep it simple. I don't know you guys, but I need to keep it simple. I need a visual picture that makes it simple for me to understand just how powerful this choice is that we have. So I just want to, looking at that picture, I just want you to imagine this situation. So suppose you're walking down the street one night, and a person ran up to you and came running up to you and robbed you. A very traumatic event. And then a few days later, you're in a completely different city, and someone starts to run towards you. Your heart starts to pound, and you feel your body temperature coming up. Then a few weeks later, you happen to be back on a beautiful, bright, sunny afternoon, and you pass by the place where you were actually robbed, and you suddenly start to feel sick. Well, what just happened? What just happened is you just engaged your short route to assess fear. The thalamus, that radar, picked up that external activity and went right to the database, got one piece of information, the hippocampus, and then processed it. In one case, the piece of information was somebody running. In the other case, it was the environment, the location. But in each case, only one piece of historical information actually set off your fear alarm. One piece. But now let's just think about, that's the short route. Now let's look at this. What would that look like if we think about that in the context of the long route? Looking at the same situation, you know, when you were in that different city and that person came running towards you, what had happened? You felt fear. But then they ran by to catch a bus, and the fear began to lift. Why? When in the middle of the day, you suddenly felt sick when you were back in that same place you were robbed, and then suddenly the sickness began to dissipate. Why? Well, what happens is your thalamus that sends out that radar information to both the amygdala directly, that short route, and also via the prefrontal cortex, that long route, and then back to the amygdala. Now this is where the prefrontal cortex comes into play. That is where your reasoning occurs. In the long route, the prefrontal cortex receives the radar report, then gathers sufficient information from the database, more than one piece, from that hippocampus, to provide what we might call a reasoned response. So what has happened on the long route, which takes a couple of seconds longer to arrive at the alarm bell at your amygdala, is there is enough information available to mitigate the danger and not activate the alarm and or turn it off. So let's just unpack that. So as that situation unfolded and you're in that different city, that person runs up to you, and all of a sudden they run by you. Oh, you just had they're just running to the bus. More information. It's in the middle of the day. The other situation, not nighttime, there's a policeman standing near me, the sickness list. More information. So when it ran through a reasoned response, it didn't need to trigger the alarm. We have a choice. We have a choice to go with the short route or wait. What we like to say is pause and see what the long route comes up with. Now there's times where that system is designed to keep us safe. If you're standing at the edge of a cliff, it's with a 150-foot sheer drop, it's crumbling under your feet. The last time you were there, you were attached to a safety line, and you aren't this time, and you sense that. You need to process that information. There is a good reason to step back. But most of the time, we're processing information from a very different perspective. Let me show you that. So just imagine, when we think of conflict, we're in a conversation that's getting heated. And suddenly, like that, that athlete we were looking at, suddenly somebody starts pointing their finger at you very aggressively, and you just see the veins in their face pulse, and you just suddenly have this sense of fear just appears in your body. You can just feel your whole body becoming flushed. Have you ever been there and ever sensed that? Or a tightness through your chest? What just happened? Well, your short route gathered one fact you were pointed at. But hypothetically, you were pointed at like that 20 years ago by some coworker that isn't even in your company anymore. And in this case, all that you're doing is gathering one piece of information using your short route and reacting to something that has nothing to do with the current person or the current situation. So in that situation, that pause could change the game. I'm going to explain that. So fear usually triggers an unhealthy conflict response that is directly connected to past emotions and experiences and behaviors. But often when we choose the short route, the connection between the information gathered and the information processed and the response are not necessarily lining up. That fear is connected to something totally unrelated to what's before you at that moment in time. Fear is what informs your conflict management system to either move from a healthy perspective to an unhealthy perspective. So let me ask you a question. How could we be intentional with engaging the long route and not being hijacked, if you will, with the short route? Well, let me show you that. And I mentioned the word, and this is what it comes down to. It's not particularly scientific, but it's the pause. It's about being intentional to pause. And being intentional to pause, even if you've already, the alarm bell's going off because your short route assessment already has been triggered. It's about the pause being the most powerful moment where conflict can move from being unhealthy to healthy, where it can actually move to being a value-added experience inside your organization. And there's one phrase, one question that needs to be asked that helps to anchor this pause, and it's why. It's as simple as that. Why am I feeling so much fear around this? And as soon as we ask that question, we give our long route time to catch up, and suddenly it's processing the information. Well, that was like 20 years ago that guy pointed at you. This guy's not doing it for the same reason. We don't need to have that fear. Why am I so passionate about this position? Why are they so passionate about this position? We have this wonderful opportunity at that moment to create space, to create breathing space in the relationship where we can protect it and start asking great questions and start with ourselves as opposed to being overwhelmed by that short route fear that's saying, this is crazy dangerous. The power of the why question is really, it moves us from this idea of leading with an opinion that's laden with judgment usually, and usually divisive and controversial, to an impression of asking a question, of being curious. I think one of the greatest gifts we have as leaders is the art of being curious, and it starts with asking great questions that start with yourself, in particular asking that why question. So let me just kind of bring this together. So as we have a choice, we have a pause, but if we look at the whole idea of engaging conflict in a summary fashion, remember what I said, that your system is perfectly designed to achieve the results you get. So we have a system, and before you see a picture there where you see in the yellow box conflict, and then conflict has 4 sources. And the first source being tasks and values, and that's what's to be done and how we value it, that's a source of conflict. Structure and data, another source of conflict of how we're to do it and what information informs us on how to do it. Interests and positions being the third, why we are passionate about doing it our way or why they are passionate about doing it their way. Relationships, how I am valued and heard and how they are valued and heard. Interesting thing, valued and heard. The #1 reason people leave organizations is because they're not valued and heard. And the number one contributor to people not being valued and heard is unhealthy conflict management systems. So, question for you. Thinking about this idea of a pause, what could you do to be more intentional with a pause? If you've seen that light go on, say, hey, you know what? I think often I'm using that short route, and I like this idea of the long route, so how can I pause? What could you do? I just appreciate if you would share a thought. How could you pause? From what we've talked about, what would you want to do differently to pause differently? If you just go ahead and type that in the dialogue box, that would be great. And we'll just kind of hear some of the things that you guys are seeing in that, if you could please. Okay. Are we hearing anything, Mr. Jaffrey?
Yeah, we have the first one from the brothers who says, I would take a break, leave the place I am in, and go outside. I have only one comment so far.
Excellent. Yeah, I mean, get away from it, right? Separate yourself physically from the space. There's a saying, I don't know if it translates into a Saudi Arabian culture, but in North America, I use it. It's called stop, drop, and roll. It's the idea that it's a safety thing we learned as kids, that it was that if you caught on fire, if your clothes caught on fire, the idea was to stop moving around, was to drop on the ground and roll around to extinguish the fire. And it's really about being that intentional about going after the pause. And when you leave the space, you're being that intentional with going after the pause. And sometimes we have to do that to create that space, because as we know, we get different outcomes. Oh, is there some other comments there as well? That was an excellent one.
Another one, that I will change my position. If I'm sitting, I'll stand. If I'm standing, then I will sit down.
Excellent. Yeah, that's great. I just suggest in that is to engage that question why as you're doing that, and it just becomes the action reinforces the question. Anything else there, Mr. Jaffrey?
No, we have only two so far, I guess. The people are a bit, yeah.
Thank you very much. That's great. So let's just go. What I'd like to do is now let's just talk a bit about empowering conflict. We've just been talking about engaging conflict, and now I want to talk about empowering conflict. And what I mentioned before, just to be very clear, that we all have a personal conflict management system. Whether we know it or not, whether we understand it or not, we do. And as I mentioned before, to the level of understanding of it and our intentional application of it will usually dictate how well it's working for us or not so well or not for us at all. And the same applies with organizations. And organizations very much have conflict management systems that are more complex, but at the very core of them, if people are our greatest asset, then a healthy organizational conflict management system will have a lot of emphasis first on who people are and then what they do. But let's unpack that organizational conflict management system first. I think the best way to look at it is to kind of think of it as an iceberg. If you think of it as an iceberg at the exposed portion, that we have positions that are visible in our organization, or in other words, above the waterline. And what would the positions would be the performance expectations of the organization, what people do, and the rules and things that we've established and how they do that. And then we have below the waterline, we also have the interests that are not visible in an organization. And the interests usually are those things of the people, the relationship of who people are, the needs, desires, concerns, and fears, if that makes sense. And so what often happens in an unhealthy conflict management system is up on the top, everything looks great. We've got these great rules, we've got these great policies, we've got this great performance standards. We've got one of my favorite ones is we've got this wonderful open door policy, but down below we have all these needs, desires, concerns, and fears that aren't met because there isn't a mechanism, a healthy mechanism to actually engage a courageous conversation, to actually move to a next practice, to actually go to a great idea, There's just this nice framework at the top, but there's this lacking part at the bottom. So the bottom tends to collide with other people in other organizations in the concept of an iceberg. So in a healthy conflict management system, what will happen is we'll successfully bring those performance and interests together. So the performance side of people and the relationship side, the interest side together, and we'll actually empower healthy conflict. And I'm going to show you how we do that. In the clients we work with, the companies, most of the organizations go through a process of kind of walking through a 4-step process. You see the 4 words there. The first thing is just assess what you have. Like, what does our conflict management system look like now? What is our system look like now? The second thing is to have some form of collaborative design that engages the people, engages the organization to what kind of a system do we desire, and what would that look like? And then the implementation piece of how do we implement this re-engineered system? How do we do that, and do that with a way that, most importantly, that we have a continually monitoring piece at the back end that continually makes sure that we're getting the results we want, i.e. our system is perfectly designed to achieve the results we get, and that's what the results we're getting are the results we want. The key thing to this is, again, coming back to the idea that if we build a conflict management system, we want to achieve a bottom line that is more than just making money. We want to achieve a bottom line that is that comprehensive, that is that sum of an organization and its people's best parts. Protecting relationships, advancing wellness and fairness, empowering pride ownership, which is about that idea that we all get to go home at night feeling good about how we handle ourselves and we handle others, and increasing or maximizing profitability. So when we think of that, the organizational conflict management system, the key at the beginning is really to understand what we have, then to decide what it is we'd like to have, then look at how we're going to implement that, and then have some kind of a monitoring system to support that we don't lose track of where we're going. You know, I think of an organization like Volkswagen, where they suddenly moved away from a value of integrity as an organization and found themselves lying to their customer in the name of return on investment. And you know, there was a part of that was an unhealthy conflict management system that didn't protect the relationships that were significant to the organization. What I'd like to do with you, I'm going to just show you a slide here, and this is called our Workplace Wellness Scorecard. And this is a scorecard. What I'm going to do is, when we finish the webinar and move to the Q&A, what I'd like to do is I'm going to give you a link that you can go ahead and download this wellness scorecard. And the whole purpose of this is to give you a tool to do a preliminary assessment of what your system kind of looks like, what you got, what's working, what's not. And then from that, it also gives you some ideas of what you could do if you want to improve 1 or 2 or 3 different areas. So I'm going to give you the link for that at the Q&A. So please stay connected, stay tuned, and we'll get to that. But that's the organizational conflict management system. Let's shift and talk about the personal conflict management system. And this is the one that really, there's 2 keys to this one that every system needs to look at. There's lots of significant parts of this, but there's 2 that I want to focus on today. And the first one is this idea of personalities, the idea of emotional intelligence. But before I get into that, let's just put this in context. We're dealing with people. I mean, we say that our greatest asset in most organizations is our people. Often, though, we try and deliver on that and value that, but often our performance things get in the way of what people do and lose sight of who they are. But it's not surprising, because here's kind of the recipe. You know, we've got 16 different personality types. We've got 5 conflict management styles. We've got 5 appreciation languages, 4 leadership styles, 3 learning styles. We've got emotions and free will, and we have a perfect recipe for either a healthy or unhealthy conflict. And that's why I know we'll never get those statistics down to 0. It's complex, and we're complex, and we're unique, but that can work to our advantage, not to our disadvantage. So how could we take this and build this into a successful, healthy recipe? Well, it's emotional intelligence. I'm sure all of you have heard about EQ. I sometimes call it emotional wisdom because it's more comprehensive about more about the relationship with the information than about the performance of it. But the idea of emotional intelligence really is that we have all those characteristics I just listed, and for each one of those characteristics, there's diagnostics that have been created. Many of you will be familiar with MBTI, the Myers-Briggs Typology Index, which is the 16 personality assessment, which is excellent for learning about yourself, excellent about leaders in organizations when we're coaching, doing conflict coaching, leadership coaching. We use that tool. We use a couple of other tools that are at the organizational level called DISC, D-I-S-C. We have one called For Animals that is just a lot of fun and people really engage in it. We use that. The Thomas Kilmann indicator, which is called TKI, which is brilliant for understanding your conflict management style. There's a diagnostic for the appreciation languages, learning styles. I just encourage every client, we kind of look at what the needs of the client are. This is part of designing your organizational conflict management system, but kind of what the organizational needs are, what the budget is, and then where we want to go. But one of the things that's really important with emotional intelligence, it's not about just feeding it in at the staff level or at the floor level or at the middle manager level. It needs to be a comprehensive, organic process that everybody participates in, because everybody is part of the solution, and usually everybody is part of the problem, even though some of us don't like to admit we're part of the problem, but we are. So I just want to, in that whole idea of when we take, I guess the best way to say is that a high level of emotional wisdom or emotional intelligence combined with that long route will give you a healthy conflict management system. A low level of emotional intelligence coupled with that short route will get you an unhealthy conflict management system every time. So what I'd like to do is give you another diagnostic. This we call our conflict capacity survey. Again, I'll give you the link. It's in the same place. We'll give you the link for that you can go and download that. And this is just to give you an idea, a little bit of an assessment for yourself of what your conflict capacity is, to be able to resolve unhealthy conflict. That's the tough stuff, the manifest stuff we see, and to empower the healthy conflict. And what does that look like? And some ideas and in areas you might want to make changes and improvements as you feel you want to improve your conflict capacity. So we're going to give you that at the end, those two tools. And again, I really would appreciate that when you do those surveys, download them. I would love your feedback. What worked well for you? What did you find out about yourself? Was there something that didn't work, didn't understand, missing? We just really appreciate feedback so we get some idea of how to make these tools better. So the first key piece that we talked about was the idea of emotional intelligence. The second one, kind of where we want to wrap this up today, is about trust. Now, you know, trust is it's a nice word. It's a powerful word. It's a critical word. And as you look at this picture, you'll see, for those of you in Saudi Arabia, you'll recognize the picture as a falconer who is practicing the art of falconry. The idea of that falcon will be released and he will go out for a kill and then return. Why have I brought this into this model? Well, I believe falconry is a wonderful example of the importance of trust, of overcoming conflict, of engaging healthy conflict. It's a wonderful example of how the model of a conflict management system can work. Because at the very core, a falcon has a fear of man. So you let a falcon go, it's not coming back. So man has to spend time and invest in this falcon to get to a place where the falcon trusts that man enough that he wants to come back. Let me give you 4 examples that I see inside of a conflict management system of how trust operates. The first is just knowing what you're passionate about and why. I mean, you've got to be passionate about what you do. You've got to love this. You've got to love leading people. You've got to be passionate people. You've got to be passionate because it's got to be a long-term thing. It's not a short-term thing. And there's going to be ups and downs, and you can't be overwhelmed by those. Actually, the word forgiveness comes into play an awful lot in the journey with building and equipping people, in my experience anyway. You know, secondly, it's about being intentional with learning more about yourself and others. I mean, curiosity is critical to learning about the underlying interests, the needs, desires, and concerns and fears of others. If you think of that falcon, you've got to understand the nuances of the falcon. You've got to understand why it does this, that, the look of the eyes that way, the ruffle of the feathers that way, the clenching of the talons this way. You have to come into this relationship really understanding the falcon, and you have to speak its language, which is not your first language in any case, but it's this idea of just really getting to understand that animal in this case, or that person that you're either working with, that you're in conflict with, or you're looking to inspire to be greater than they are inside your organization. The third thing is learning how to communicate and build trust in relationships. And that comes down to what I've been talking about, that idea of asking great questions that start with yourself. Trust is built inside the foundation of a relationship. And to get to that relationship, people have to know that you value them first about who they are before what they do. And too often in a corporate environment, we get focused on what people do as opposed to who they are. And they're both important, but our people are our greatest asset. And who they are is when we empower and inspire them, when we empower healthy conflict, that they go from those safe places to those great places, from those cautious conversations to the courageous ones. That is where we start to find the gold. And that's where we start to see the profit in the relationship with our people about who they are before what they do. The last one, and the fourth piece that I see as a parallel with the falconry, is that understanding how fear can work for you and not against you. I think I've already kind of laid a picture of that, but you think of that falcon. So here's this falcon with this inherent trust of man, and you got to build this relationship. How do you do that? How would you do that? Well, you start asking questions of yourself, since you can't ask the falcon, why is he doing that? Why is this happening? Remember the pause? Why is this happening? What does that happen? And all of a sudden the falcon just suddenly reacts. And you get this sense of fear. The short route kicks in. But you've already been developing these why questions, so you just wait for the long route, and you just realize, well, that's because right there I just did my fast reaction caused that, or that distraction caused this. And we start to build that trust, and we build that relationship. And it ultimately gets to this place. What's really cool about the parallel here is that trust is when a falconer or a leader has the confidence in their falcon or the people they're leading to fully release their self-determination, to fully give them the capacity and the confidence and the empowerment to go ahead and do what they are with who they are. So trust at its very core is confidence and empowerment in an organization. So I guess if I was going to kind of bring that together, a healthy personal conflict management system is powered by emotional intelligence, by trust, by confidence, and will empower healthy conflict. Okay, so let's bring this home and kind of wrap it up here. And that we've talked first about engaging and now about empowering conflict. And what we've covered here is we've talked about the two types of conflict. So we have the healthy conflict and unhealthy conflict. We also have inside of that, we have latent conflict, which is the hidden conflict, and manifest conflict, which is the seen conflict. We have the two pathways of fear, the long route and the short route, and we have choices in how we respond to those, and we have talked about some techniques of pausing to get after the long route, which will give us the results we're looking for in our conflict management system. We've talked about conflict management systems, that there's personal ones and there's organizational ones, and everyone has one, and how well it works for you will be directly dependent on how much you know about it as a system for you and operating as a system for you. Inside of those systems, we talked about the critical pieces of a personal system is emotional wisdom, that emotional EQ we talked about, emotional intelligence, and going after that. Secondly, it's about that trust and confidence to be able to step out in trust, to try, to do the things that need to be done. And so as we look at that, I bring this all back down to this idea. So this was about engaging, empowering conflict. To actually make conflict, we talk a lot here about turning conflict into profit. And if we think about that, when we talk about turning conflict into profit, is kind of that's a simplistic statement, because it's not just about the money, is it? It's not just about the profit. It's about the people. It's about what we do, the passion we have for what we do. It's about a sum of an organization's best parts and its people's best parts, which, as we've talked about, first protects relationships, advances that emotional fairness, empowers pride ownership. That's a huge one, that we get to go home at night feeling good about how we handle ourselves and others. Invests in wellness, that physical and emotional and psychological wellness that is such a huge cost in organization. And 5, makes more money. Let's just call it what it is. That's not a bad thing. Makes more money. So I want to kind of hold us right here, and I want to ask you one question. What's been most valuable? From what you've heard here today, what you've heard of, whether it be about conflict, the fear pieces, what's been the most valuable piece? What's your aha moment? What's that soundbite that you can grab hold of? This is what I'm going to start with. This is what I want to work on. This is what I want to explore a little more. What I'd love you to do is write that down for yourself, but make sure, I'd love you to type that in the box and tell us what that looks like for you. What is that one thing that jumps out for you that has been most valuable? If you just would type that in, that would be great. I'd love to just see what that looks like. So just go ahead and type that in now. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, Michael, can we also commence the Q&A sessions, or should we wait for the comments first?
If we've got a couple of comments, I'm just going to wrap up here. But yeah, we can definitely start the Q&A right now. Yep, absolutely.
Okay. People,
yes.
People have posted some questions. Okay. He said one of them, conflict management, a term is very interesting to me.
The term conflict management?
Yeah. As a term, very interesting to me.
And to whoever provided that, what part of that is most interesting to you?
So usually we look to conflict as a bad thing, but now conflict management as a term is very interesting.
Ah, okay, good, yeah. And if I could just, in that comment...
Resolution is a key to success.
Sorry, could you repeat that, Mr. Jeffrey?
Conflict resolution is a key to success.
Isn't it? Yeah, you know, success. And, you know, how do we define success? I mean, that's an interesting question, a word, you know. I believe success is a very... It's much richer than just the position you hold, the wealth it attracts, and the authority it wields. It's really about giving somebody something that they don't even know they need or want, but once they have it, you know, they can't imagine living without, but they can't wait to give it away. That kind of success that becomes contagious, and in the case of business, translates into profits, but at the same time, it also translates into a richness in the relationship with the people. And I always like to think, I would love to be. My goal as an organization, imagine being the organization that everybody wants to work for because it's so engaging and empowering, and they actually, as opposed to being threatened or fearful of conflict, they actually engage it and empower. So I love that. Success is a huge part of this.
Another one, win-win situation is a success also. So a lot of people are correlating it with the success, the resolution, the management, and the win-win situations.
Excellent. Yeah, and that with success, or sorry, with management of conflict, you know, we talked about that, managing conflict, and I want you just to think about that in the context. If we manage conflict, we're usually trying to manage the performance of it as it relates to the circumstances that we're addressing, and those circumstances, as we said, if we don't resolve conflict, it's going to get worse. It's not going to go away. It will come up and it'd be a problem at some time in the future unless all the energy, meaning all the people that are involved in it, are all gone. But that still could lead to residual conflict. But if I just want to encourage a thought, so leading conflict or engaging in empowering conflict puts emphasis back on the people. It puts the emphasis back on not just the performance of how we're going to change conflict, but actually it puts it on the relationship with the people and their interests. One of the greatest challenges we have with an organization, often when I'll go in, the first comment I'll make to a company is we'll sit down and I'll say, the first thing I need you guys to know is that as of this moment, the fear of conflict has left the building. Everybody has this little nervous chuckle. And then somebody brave enough usually says, well, how's that possible? Remember, we know the statistics, so how's that possible? I said, well, here's the thing. I'm going to take care of all the conflict that is uncomfortable for this organization. The stuff that is dangerous, some of the stuff that needs to be dealt with outside the company, but I'm going to take care of it because I want you to focus on empowering healthy conflict. I want you to see conflict in a way like you've never seen it before. And you can almost feel the lift in the room, the visual, oh, thank goodness I don't have to worry about that anymore. And this is a little inside thing. Most of the time that conflict that they thought I was going to deal with, they end up dealing with, because once we equip them with the tools they need, the emotional intelligence and the equipping for the trust model, they can't wait to try it. They have the confidence, and they know there's a backstop in us or in the people we've developed in the organization to support them. So that idea of just allowing trust to be, or conflict to be completely separated from its traditional path of being fearful, like kind of a thing, a noun, to the idea of leading it from a position of being a verb, a catalyst for something greater. That makes sense.
Okay, Ms. Walker, we really need to commence the Q&A session. As I'm looking at the time, we're a bit pressed. I see we have only 8 more minutes left, so if you allow me, may I jump in straight to the question box, as we have a couple of questions already posted?
Certainly. Certainly.
Okay, being the first one from Brother Muhammad Al-Taibe, the question is, do you think it is advisable to have a written conflict management policy that is communicated to employees?
Yes, I do. I believe that we need to have, we say a written conflict management policy. What we need is to define the options that we've decided are appropriate for our conflict management system. When I say options, there's a lot of different things that we do to manage conflict. We have a lot of different communication platforms. So as an example, an organization says, they have a policy that says, we have an open door policy. Is that a term that you use in business in Saudi Arabia? Open door policy?
Yes.
So, okay, so what happens is an organization puts that in as a policy, but they never engage people on how to use it and have the confidence to actually exercise and use it to go through the door with this courageous conversation and to actually open it. So yes, we need the policy, but then we also need to engage the relationships that people have the confidence and empowerment to actually use it. And then we need leaders who are confident not to be overwhelmed by what comes through that door and grab the short route and create more conflict than that happens after they come through that door. So that 9 out of 10 of the employees, the escalation usually is, it's either escalated with other employees or with other managers. So absolutely yes, but we also need to we have to engage the people and empower the people to be able to operate in it, and the leadership to be able to trust in the people and not be overwhelmed by it with that short route of fear to conflict.
Great. We have another one from Mr. Jay Shankar Shangam. The question is, you see the third-party involvement in conflict resolution is necessary.
Is that necessary?
Yeah, the third-party involvement for conflict resolution.
Yeah, great question. So there is a place and time for it. So for example, what we're trying to do in an organization where we're developing a healthy conflict management system, an organizational conflict management system, what we're trying to do is build into that model. We want to make sure that we have this very strong self-help conflict resolution system in there. Meaning we want our managers, and we don't want everybody running to somebody with their problem. We want them to first of all try and negotiate their problem, their circumstance, their conflict together. And we need to give them the tools to do that. So they have to have some level of emotional intelligence to be able to do that, understanding of the fear thing. So when we start to increase their personal conflict management systems, they will actually go and try and resolve the conflict themselves. So that would be a one-on-one, what we call a negotiation. But in some cases, that doesn't work out. And sometimes it will escalate. Things will go bad. That just happens. So we need a mediator. And a mediator or a facilitator, if it's an organization, we need a mediator to step in and help ask those questions and act as a person to create the ability to create mirroring of those conversations, paraphrase it, allow the conversation to breathe without it getting more hostile, and with the ultimate objective of reaching a win-win outcome that they want, not what the mediator wants. And so absolutely, it doesn't have to be, and we want to the more people solve their own problems, the more empowered and confident they become. The more confident and empowered they become, the more creative and innovative they become, and the more creative and innovative they become, the more productive and more profitable the organization is in very simple economic flow. So we want to empower that self-help model, one-to-one, but we also need to have the mechanism where there's a mediator to provide that. Just as we do a function where we call it, we function as an ombuds for smaller and larger companies, where we're an arm's length solution, just like I was describing earlier, where if there's something that comes up that needs a mediator, we step in and do that. So that the company never has to have that anxious, well, what do we do with this? We don't know how to handle this. So great question. Thank you. I hope I answered it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have another one, a supplementary from Muhammad. Can you correlate the role of leaders and managers in setting up the culture to promote healthy conflict by leading by example?
Wow. I can tell by the question that it's something that the gentleman is already either practicing or working towards, because just the way that was phrased is beautiful. I mean, what is a manager and what is a leader? And when we think about a manager tends to manage processes, and a leader tends to lead people. That's kind of the way I've seen it. And I'm not trying to, and it's not about making one higher or the other. They're both critical and necessary for an organization. But if I think of leadership at kind of as a pyramid, at the top level, leadership flowing down to managers, line managers, foremen, shop people, floor people, whatever, unions, all that. If we think of that organization, and we talk about leading by example, is what I heard. I said, the way I look at that is we take that pyramid and we turn it on its head. And we actually look at that leadership and say, so how would you like to invest in your people today? How would you like to invest in your managers? And then how would you like your managers to invest in your people? So we create this beautiful flow up of investment into both who people are and what they do. And as that happens, that leadership by example, it actually, even though we've turned it upside down, the pyramid from a leading standpoint, what happens from a trust standpoint, it goes back up to the top, and they see the leaders at a level of trust because they're actually walking their talk, they're staying true to the vision, and they're not losing sight of the value of the people. And when there is a problem, there's a mechanism that we can deal with it and we can resolve the conflict. So leading by example requires every full engagement of all the parties, but at the very top, it has to start with a desire to really want to invest in your people first. And through that, they will help empower your products, processes, and services, and to the ultimate outcome of the desire of the company.
Okay, thank you very much. Just looking at the time, as we're really pressed on time, but a lot of people, Mr. Walker is requesting about the resources that you had mentioned, and if you could also share the link about the questionnaires that you were mentioning during the webinar. Is it possible to receive it later via email so we can broadcast it to the participants, or the attendees?
Absolutely. I will send you the link. The link's on the screen right now. And I will send it to you, but that link is open. It's located on my website, legendarycoaching.ca. But if you go to that, you'll find there's the workplace wellness scorecard. There's also the conflict capacity diagnostic that I mentioned, and you'll find there's a third one there. I thought I'd put in there, and it's what we call our profitizing worksheet, and it's really the diagnostic that we use to help identify what the cost of conflict is in an organization, and then what the desired level of cost might be for the organization, and then developing a plan to get there.
Okay, thank you very much. Folks, I've also tried to broadcast the same link on the chat console. So if you look at on your right side of the console, you will be able to see a link which Mr. Walker is illustrating on the screen. However, I have pasted the same link in the console so you can directly click on it and be able to access the website or the landing page. So with that note, I would like to really conclude and would like to thank you, Mr. Walker, on behalf of the Medina Institute for Leadership and Entrepreneurship, for your valuable time to deliver this live webinar. So thank you very much, sir.
You're welcome, and thank you to all of the participants for investing an hour of your time with me. I appreciate your questions and the feedback. It allows this process to become very vibrant and live. Mr. Jaffrey, thank you for moderating, and thank you for Milo inviting me to be part of this. And I just encourage any of your members, any of those that are participating today, that sometimes questions come out of what was shared, or you heard something, you want, feel free to, you'll find all my contact information on the website, on the links. I'd be more than happy to answer your questions. I'd love to hear, though, as I said before, just hear from you. What did you discover with those diagnostics? How did they change things for you? And again, if there's ways we can improve them, we'd love to hear about that as well. So again, thank you so much for your time, and I look forward to hopefully working with you in the future.
Likewise, feelings are mutual. Thank you very much, Mr. Walker, once again, and thank you all of those who participated in this webinar. We are recording it. Please stay tuned to webinar.mile.org to learn about the upcoming programs, webinars, and equally to access the archive system. So thank you very much once again. I'm going to end and conclude the session, so you all will be automatically dismissed out. You all have a good day, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are calling.